All right. Welcome everybody that is trickling in. I'm super excited to be having this conversation today. And so first trick of a Zoom support group facilitator, first tip of the trade is when facilitating a support group over Zoom, I do like to sign into my Zoom room a couple minutes early, just like a lot of you did. The reason for that is it just gives me time if there's something weird about the tech, or if I'm signed into the wrong account. My organization has multiple Zoom accounts so that we can have multiple support groups happening at one time. Giving myself that buffer is nice because it helps me come into my support group space in a really centered way. So that's the first thing that I'll pass on that I've learned. One of the next things that I'll pass on is I, as a facilitator, and as facilitators, it's nice to drop in early. But when it comes to starting the group itself, when it comes to sharing the values of the support group, I actually wait a few minutes. And this is different than what my organization usually does. Usually in my organizations, we're like, we want to be very trauma informed and start and end things on time. With a Zoom meeting, we still always end our support groups at the same time. But sometimes I like to give a bit of a buffer because you're going to have some folks that are new to the platform. And maybe some of you noticed as you signed in, you clicked a little button to say that it was okay for your browser to run Zoom. So giving folks that buffer to kind of figure out the technology first before jumping in to state, you know, those important values, whatever container you're holding in your support group, is something that I have found useful. So welcome. I'm really excited that we're doing this again. Just want to get out there that we are recording this webinar this time. We had a lot of folks that weren't able to make the first one, and talk about how we'll use this space. Right now, because we're going to be a large group, everyone is muted, so that we'll talk more about muting the mic later and how it's great for, you know, people with less internet bandwidth, that they can still participate. But the way that we can still communicate questions, because I want this to be interactive and I want people to have their questions answered, is to use the chat box for questions throughout. And if you're new to Zoom, you can find that chat box feature by taking your mouse and sort of dragging it to the bottom of your screen. And you'll see a little cartoon kind of talk box with 3 dots in it. And that will open up your chat. Yay, it looks like Shane has already found it. Awesome, hey Shane, and saying yay. So you can now see, and Alexander has said hi in the chat box. So welcome to everyone who's joining us, and I'm stoked that you're able to utilize that. And we're going to talk more about how the chat box can impact our support group formats later in the webinar. So what I'm going to do is I definitely have some content that I think is going to be useful to cover. And today, Beth asked a great question. My plan today is to run, I hope to get through most of like the content in an hour and still have a half an hour to kind of troubleshoot and ask more questions. And I'm going to be monitoring the chat box as best as I can. But what makes it easier is, you know, if questions can sort of be reserved to the specific topic we're on at that moment, it makes it easier, I think, for people to follow. It makes us jump around a little less. So I'm going to tell you what the topics are. And I'm actually going to start. And I think there's someone, I have it on entry, but there's someone that is not muted. I'm just gonna take a minute to see if I can figure out where that feedback's coming from. But if you notice it yourself by seeing like a green, I think somebody took care of it. So we'll be covering how to mute microphones. Okay, so here are the big things that we're going to talk about today and kind of the order that we're going to cover them. So before we even get to how we use Zoom, what I want to cover first are how we distribute our access codes. That's really important for us as support group facilitators because we want to both balance access but also privacy for our participants. And some of us may be facilitating groups where the meeting is a closed one. So I'm actually going to be basing a lot of my experience doing this webinar comes from facilitating Hearing Voices Network support groups online. I've been doing that for about 3 years using the Zoom platform. And they are closed meetings. So those meetings are just for folks like myself who hear and see things others don't, sense things that others do not. We find it really valuable to just have a space where we're in the majority with having these experiences, where we can say, hey, you know, I'm hearing a voice right now and she's crying and, you know, she sounds like my sister. And we don't widely distribute these access codes, and we'll kind of get into why. So during the course of this webinar, I'm definitely not here to tell anybody what to do. I'm not going to tell you the choices to make. You know your community best, but I'm going to give you a range of options, and we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of each option that you have. So we're going to do that before we even get to the Zoom platform itself. We are going to learn how to schedule a Zoom meeting and some of the basics that we need to know as support group facilitators. We're not going to cover a lot of the stuff that you might need to do a webinar, like screen sharing and all that. That's a little bit beyond the scope, but there are a lot of great YouTube videos out there. Zoom is the only platform that we are going to explore today. And there's a couple reasons why. Zoom, we utilize, there's other platforms, but a lot of them do not have a call-in feature. So right now, while we're building access, we just want to acknowledge that for some people, they might not have computers and they might not have a smartphone either. A lot of the folks in my community, that are struggling right now, don't have a home to go to, might have a track phone. Some people might still be using a landline. So Zoom is really the most accessible in terms of being able to offer your participants that dial-in option. And when folks call in from the phone, they are going to be able to hear everyone, and they're going to be able to share their experience too. Now, they won't get that additional, obviously, they're not going to have that additional connection of seeing the folks on the webcam, but they, they're still going to have something. So there's certainly other platforms out there, but in my organization, though we've looked at a lot of them and priced and budgeted, we keep coming back to Zoom just because it is most accessible to people. So we'll talk about how to schedule a Zoom meeting and some basics of that. And I think someone's figured out how, okay. What I'll ask is, even if you're like a Zoom master and know how to write on my screen, it'll be helpful to keep the slide from getting too cluttered, to just use the chat box. So we'll cover Zoom basics, and then what I'd like to talk about is what are some group dynamics to consider, because I think a lot of us might be moving a support group that's normally in our community, maybe at a community center or a church basement or a library, and you're now moving to this platform. So what are some of the things that you might expect as a facilitator when you make that move, and what are some of the workarounds? So I see Beth, because I don't think I'm not sure why your screen's blinking on and off. Right now, because I've got it in speaker view and screen share, it's probably not a distraction to others. So it could just be a connection issue since there's a number of us on the call. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump right in to talking about our options for distributing the access link. And if you're new to Zoom, you can move, if you can't see the full slide, you can move the box with the faces in it around by clicking at the very top of it. If you hover your mouse above where my face is, a bar will appear that'll allow you to drag so that you can fully read the words on the slides. So how do I distribute an access link? We're going to talk about a few different options. One is just to publicly post it on a website. So there are some folks that do that. We have some groups in my organization, not the Hearing Voices Network, but a lot of our alternatives to suicide groups, general peer support groups, we've, during this time have moved them online and simply post them on our organizational website. So we'll talk about the pros and cons of that. There's also the option of keeping your link private, but distributing it through individual emails. There's also the listserv option. So a lot of you who work for organizations, you might have access to a listserv that you use to communicate. It might be Mad Mimi or MailChimp, Constant Contact. Those are some of the most familiar ones. And during the course of this webinar, I hope to have time to show you what one of those looks like if you're not familiar. There's also the option, maybe some of you found out about this webinar through a Facebook event. And a lot of folks have been distributing Zoom access codes in that way. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. Okay, so the first one we'll talk about is the publicly posting of the link. We'll show you later how you get that access link. But right now, what we're just going to consider are the pros and cons of posting that link and call-in info just on your organizational website. So some of the pros means there's way less emailing for you. you're not going to have individuals reaching out to you for the access code. It's just going to be out there. It's going to be available on the internet for anyone to see. Because of this, you're not going to need any type of additional listserv platform. You're not going to have to communicate as much with your participants. So you don't really need all that. Now, I do still, even if you publicly post your codes, guys, I think it's good to have a contact email available for people that experience technical difficulties. Now, it can definitely be hard when it's like 2 minutes before your group starts and you're getting those emails. We all have to make kind of our cutoff point where it's like, I need to now focus on facilitating instead of doing tech support. But if, like we do in my organizations, if you have a co-facilitator, we're going to talk more about why that can be helpful with the breakout rooms. You might be able to manage some of those tech questions that tend to flood in right before or right after group start time. And, you know, the benefit of the public post is it's out there. People can find it way more quickly. And probably a lot of you have seen in, you know, the past week, these access links popping up on various websites. Now there's a big con to this one, and that has to do with privacy. So in our HVN groups, we've had a number of issues. Now again, we don't publicly post the codes, but we did have experience where, for example, the family members of folks that hear voices would pretend to be their family member in order to get the access link. And that's just not, our groups are for lived experience. We have separate groups for family members. And so what would happen to us in those early days is we might sign into a group, and where you see my one face in the box that you can see me talking, we would see something like this. I'm gonna grab my baby seal pillow from over here, where there would be two faces in the screen, one person not looking particularly interested in what was going on, and the other this anxious parent face that's like, hello, can you tell my son to take his meds? Or, you know, and obviously that, you know, was not good for our group dynamic, and we ended up having to remove that person from the group. And we'll get to how you do that later. So, you know, you just need to reflect on your own group topic and think about, hey, how vulnerable is my support space to people that are curious? Are there folks out there that want to observe people with this experience for whatever reason? I mean, some people have good intentions, but, you know, a support group is a support group. It's not a training. There's trainings that people can attend to learn more about experiences. People in support group probably don't want to be observed or like probed for questions. I know I definitely don't. I just want a space to talk about my experience with others. And I have to say, you know, in the past week, we have seen these reports of people jumping into public Zoom calls, like doing the screen share and sharing things that were really like gross, and that Zoom call having to be shut down. I just want to say that's never happened to me before in my group, but again, I don't publicly publish the codes. And probably the best thing to do is to just make sure that only the hosts have the screen share option. You really don't need to do much screen sharing when you're moving like a support group online. unless, as a facilitator, you have like a group agreement that you want to put up on the screen. Most of your participants probably won't need that option. And, depending on the vulnerability of the subject, your participants could feel less secure overall in your group if they know that the access link is just out there. So I know a lot of our Hearing Voices Network group participants really like knowing that when they sign in, everyone that's there has answered an email indicating that yes, they personally see, hear, or otherwise sense phenomenon that others don't. And as every group facilitator knows, if people aren't feeling super secure in the space, they're probably not going to be sharing very much, and it's going to be a lot less powerful of a group.
Who am I speaking with? No, Susan.
Okay. So I just had to mute someone's microphone, and we'll show people how to do that later. Okay, so next option, we've kind of covered that public post option. Many people choose it. Then a second option that you have is just to create your access link and then distribute it through individual emails. So people are reaching out to you directly saying, hey, I'm interested in your support group for cat owning knitters, just to make something up. And then you respond and send them the link along. This will mean that you do not have to pay for that additional listserv software. And I'm sorry, I forgot to budget out how much our listserv software costs us every month. It does sort of depend on how large your listservs are. So the more people you add to your listservs, software like MadMimi, the more you pay. So I don't have that budget. What I can say though is I'm pretty sure Zoom is like, for one host, the pro account is $15 a month right now. So obviously our cons here are we're going to be doing a lot more emailing. We're going to have to respond to every person that is interested and send them that link. Now, the biggest con, I think, is if you change your access link for some reason, you will then need to share it with every single person that needs it, rather than just sending out a mass email through your listserv with the new access link. What I recommend for support group facilitators is to just have a recurring group. That's what we're going to demonstrate today, so that, instead of creating a new link every time. But if you do have some kind of privacy breach that didn't feel good for your group dynamic and you want to change that link, there are times when we've needed to do that. And so if you don't have the listserv, you're going to have to email that out to folks individually. And as I'm sure people know, there's certain, I think, firewalls on like the internet now where if you send too many emails that have like a ton of folks just in the send box, you can get marked kind of as a spammer. So that's why a lot of people choose to use things like MadMimi. So let's get to that. Maintaining a listserv. This is what we do for our HVN USA online groups. It is the way that you have the most security. So you are only sending out that Zoom link to people that you've communicated with and added to a listserv. because HVN USA, our online groups are very large, we actually have multiple listservs with the hope that one day we will have an East Coast group, a Central group, a Mountain group. We're sort of moving in that direction. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Using a listserv allows you to very easily send people a reminder that the group's happening that day, what its values are, and you know, the access information. It's easy to do. The platform does a lot of the work for you. And when you use something like Mad Mimi, there's a lot less chance of your communications being marked as spam. But I just want to be clear that that's not 100%. There's still a lot of people that their emails might send your listserv link to junk, spam, or other. So what I like to do is let people know when I've added them to the listserv and say, hey, if you don't see an email from me before, you know, like 2 hours before the group starts, it's 2 hours out, you still haven't seen that email reminder from me, make sure to check your spam box because it's probably in there. And that's been helpful. And yeah, so the major con with this one is you are just going to have to learn an additional online platform and pay for it, because Zoom is a great platform, but it won't maintain a listserv for you. It will do many things, but it does not yet do that. You need a separate one. So what does it look like when, ooh, I forgot, I added this slide, the Facebook event page. I want to talk about this really quickly. So if anyone saw this over Facebook and that's how you learned about this webinar, will you say yes in the chat box if you know how? And we'll see. All right, so there's a couple, okay, all right, so there's several yeses. So for a lot of folks, people are on the Facebook platform. Now, the thing is, not everyone is on Facebook, and I totally want to, you know, respect that. So notifying your group participants through Facebook should always be a supplementary option. Now, one of the nice things about Facebook is it's kind of this middle ground where you can make your Facebook event pages public or private. So let's look at that for a second. So this is what a Facebook event looks like. Probably a lot of folks have seen this. And when you're hosting an event, you have the option to make it, let me see if I can just edit it from here. All right, I'm not seeing where I can edit it, like show you guys how to edit it like in this moment. But we'll look at it if we have time. So this was just a public announcement that the group was happening. And as you can see, we've offered to them in Facebook all of the access information. If you just joined us by clicking the link, you probably didn't have to put in a meeting ID. But if you were using like the Zoom app on your phone, you might have utilized that. And then we put in the one tap mobile. Now we didn't put in Facebook, I didn't add the call-in option because I figured if anyone was on Facebook, they would probably be joining through a smartphone or a computer. And also, I kind of wanted people not to call into this because I'm sharing my screen so much and I wanted you all to be able to see it. So it might be beyond the scope of this webinar to demonstrate how to start a Facebook, create a Facebook event. But anything we talk about here that's not support group specific, there's probably a great YouTube tutorial out there if you just Google how to create a Facebook event. And it's when you're really creating your event right here, as soon as you click create, do you see where it gives you the option immediately to decide, is this going to be public and shareable and viewable for all, or private, where you're just inviting people that you know meet or the demographic of your group. Another thing folks do is some groups have a private Facebook group for group members to connect in. And if that's your choice, you can also share group codes in there. Cool. I'm just going to check my chat box right now to see if people had, oh, where is my chat box? Just wanted to see if people had questions. Okay, cool. All right, so I think it'll probably be helpful to show people before we get to Zoom. We're gonna get to Zoom really soon, but I do wanna show people kind of what a listserv looks like. Just so it's less, intimidating. All right. All right, I'm gonna move this. I just want to let people know these emails we're looking at, these are all people that have taken Alternatives to Suicide facilitator training. It's not like a super private list. So I'm not gonna show you, lists of people that are support group attendees. But the main reason that I want people to take a gander at this is I want to show you, if you have a listserv, what you can send out each group day. All right, she's being kind of slow right now. There we go. Okay, so this is an example of an email that goes out, I think every Wednesday to a few of our listservs. And, it says it's a national group, so I think it's nice to give everybody their time zone, so that, they don't have to do like the math, where it just says, yeah, if you're in Colorado, click the link at 4. Encouraging people to come as on time as they can to hear the values, and some statements about, what you might find in the group. So in this group, you're going to hear people talking about what the voices they hear say, what they sound like, how they make us feel, all this stuff. And there's not going to be assumption that people have a biomedical illness or deficit, regardless of whether they have a diagnosis or not. There's a link here to some of the group values, a survey about the group. A lot of this is optional. But when you send out this reminder, you can ask people, have a reminder about who this group is for, so that family members or, curious, clinicians, this is not that group. There are other groups for you, just not this one. And you can reach out for other resources. And I also include, because our group is private, you know, we ask people not to forward the email to others. We have had situations where someone forwarded the email to someone, but they didn't actually have the experience that the group was really for. And then now you can see your Zoom invite, which we will look at later. You can embed for people a link in a listserv where they can literally just by a click of the button join the email. But then we have all our important phone numbers where people can dial in even without internet, and then enter their meeting ID. And yeah, a great feature that Zoom has. So I will show folks like how, you know, they're in a listserv, for example, you know, if we decide to have a group where, you know, it's really later at night, it's more for the mountain and the West Coast, we can send out that message to only those lists. And so, yeah, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time with the listserv platforms. And I'm not saying Mad Mimi is the best platform. I make no endorsement there. It's just the one that I use and have used for a few years. But I just want people to, when I'm saying like listserv, like sometimes people are like, what are you even talking about? I mean, I used to be one of those people where I'm like, I don't even know what that means. So I just wanted us to take a look at it. Okay. And cool. So what I'm going to show you now on this slide is if you want to keep your group, you know, specific to an particular experience, and you're not publicly posting that link on a website, I basically have a response to people that I copy and paste. So a lot of people will just reach out to you and say, I'm interested in your online group. That's what's most common. But remember, for my online support group, it's just for people with a specific experience. But a lot of times it might be, we don't know like who is reaching out. So that's why, you know, we have a standard response. Hello, thank you for your interest in these groups. Are you someone who has personal experience with hearing voices, seeing visions, and or navigating alternate reality states? Or are you a family member or supporter of someone who has these experiences? So notice, folks, we do not say in our response that we're not going to share the access codes with you if you don't have this experience. Because unfortunately, when we did that in the past, people would just say what we wanted to hear to get the access codes, even if it wasn't true. And we would have that situation where there would be someone's mom and then a person that was kind of being coerced by their parent to sit in front of the computer screen. And no one really wants that. Like, you know, even the best supports, they stop being supportive when they're forced on a person, and it doesn't feel good for your group participants as a whole. So this is our standard response to any inquiry. And then when we find out, you know, where a person is coming from, then we will add them to the right listserv or direct them to another resource. Yay. Okay, so we have just finished our first section of this webinar, which is how do we even start by distributing the access link? What I would like to move on to doing now is to get into our Zoom account and learn together how do we schedule a meeting of our support group on Zoom. Great. Okay, welcome to Zoom. So what you're looking at right now is what, if you're hosting a Zoom, if you're on your organizational or personal Zoom, when you log in with your email and password, this is what you are going to see. This screen will come up, and then, you know, most of the time as hosts or facilitators, what you're probably going to want to click on is up here. Hopefully people can see that, my account. And it takes us to this page where we have some information, you know, my boss's name, our company name, and some info like, you know, that our group, that our Zoom account is set for the Eastern time. But when we want to come to the place where we're actually scheduling our support group meeting, we need to come to where it says meetings here. And there we can even see, folks, that little green light that shows, hey, we're meeting right now in this meeting called Bring Your Support Group Online. All right, so let's all work together to schedule a new Zoom support group. All right, so someone tell me in the chat box, what is our support group going to be called? What is its specific name? Because we want to make sure that we don't want to just call it my meeting. That's less useful for a lot of reasons. So what are we scheduling here? What's its specific focus? Somebody give me something. Helpless Facilitators Anonymous. Awesome. So yeah, and Christian, we're gonna learn right now how to do, how to send an invitation. So I'm just gonna pick the one at the top, Helpless Facilitators Anonymous. For some reason, I find that very funny. But truly, you know, one day we are all gonna feel like, you know, powerful in using Zoom. If I can learn to do it, trust me. I just want to say, y'all, I'm someone that has lived in psych wards and psychiatric group homes. They didn't teach us on the psych ward how to do this, okay? So it's something that I learned, and if I can learn to do it, you can learn to do it. So we're gonna do it together. So what we wanna hit when it's time to schedule our group is this big blue button here. Schedule a new meeting. All right, and so you see the topic is they're gonna generate a name for you, my meeting. That is not ideal. One of the reasons why is particularly if your organization starts scheduling a lot of meetings. So I'm gonna go back actually for just a second. I don't know if everyone will be in this situation, but you know, my org, we have a lot of Zooms happening at one time. And if that's your situation too, you really need to look and see, okay, so tomorrow someone's doing a group and it's about exploring your relationship to psychiatric drugs. You know, that's an important weekly group that people utilize. We don't want to schedule something over that group because Zoom will allow you to schedule meetings at the same time, guys. It won't stop you from doing it. But what it will stop you from doing is when it comes time to meet, only one is going to bounce the other. And we definitely don't want that. And we definitely don't want a situation that I've had before where I accidentally crashed someone's Zoom private meeting. I think it was like a job interview or something. And I showed up because I had scheduled something in the personal meeting room with somebody else, and I showed up. And yeah. All right. So how do we schedule a new meeting? I'm going to go back to that. So first we're checking, this is a meeting of HFA meeting. And we see, oh, okay. So psych med support starts at 7 tomorrow. So let's see, we could have our meeting Tuesdays at 5 p.m. And if it's a 90-minute meeting, we'll still be out of there with well enough time for psych med support. So, all right, so you want to give your meeting a name. I'm gonna say also helpless and hopeful. And you've also got here the option of adding a description. You know, this, if you give yourself a decent, clear title, you might not use this, but if it feels important, you could leave something for your facilitators and say, you know, other people using the platform, this is where we build skills with Zoom. So once you've got your name, the most important thing is to get that date and time there. So you've got your calendar. And remember, we've decided that our meeting is going to be a recurring Tuesday 5 p.m. Support group. So what we would do is go in there and start with the first date that our group is going to meet. And then we will schedule it for 5 p.m. Obviously, we want to make sure that we've got our right time zone so we can get in there, and you'll see, guys, that you can make those adjustments as needed. And then duration. So a word about duration. It's really nice. I'm going to put this as a 90-minute meeting. Most of our HVN onlines are 90 minutes, and our alternatives to suicide are 90 minutes. A word about duration, folks, is your group Zoom will not end your group if it goes over time. So some people have had the concern, like, oh my gosh, like, what if for some reason I have a meeting and I need to go a little bit over? Like, I need to close my meeting, but it's like 1 minute past 90 minutes. Zoom is not going to shut you down. This duration piece is just a guide for other people that are using the platform to know when your meeting ends. So they don't schedule over it, but it's not just going to cut you off, if that makes sense. So don't worry about that. And then what we want to do is, for most of us as support group facilitators, you know, our meetings reoccur. And if we hit reoccurring meeting, you know, we then have this access code. It updates our Zoom calendar, and we can use the same code week after week. and we can choose the recurring time. So let's say HFA is a weekly support group. It repeats, once a week, and it meets on Tuesday. Now you could also, if those times are opening, you can certainly have a bi-weekly group. But with this recurring, like if I say, oh, this meeting also meets on Friday as well, you're not able to do it at a different time. So for example, I facilitate an HVN support group Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. I have separate meeting codes for those groups. I make separate ones. And Katrina, that's a great question. Zoom, as far as I know, does not have any time limit. So, Dawn, I thought you said you were signing off. Okay. So yeah, just everyone should know that what we're looking at right now is a professional Zoom account that costs $15 a month. I hope it's okay. I know a lot of you are already doing support groups in person that have space rental charges likely. So hopefully this is going to bring your budget down in terms of group. But yeah, I am showing folks, this is what a pro Zoom account looks like. And on a pro Zoom account, you could totally, Katrina, if you wanted, meet for 4 hours. Let me see. I've never done this. Yeah, it looks like you could have a meeting that is literally like 24 hours long, if you wanted. And so, yeah, so we've got our group, we've got our weekly group. We can choose an end date if we want, but we don't really know how long we're going to be riding out COVID-19. So, you can also pick 20 weeks. Then for most of us, don't worry about this stuff. Don't worry about registration or meeting password. The meeting password it doesn't generate a unique password for people. So you're just as well off to kind of, if you want to keep your group secure, to just keep your access link secure. And yeah, I think, I said I wasn't going to tell people what to do, so I won't. Some groups do this. I think for me, my perspective is I haven't felt like having the password would have helped me avoid any of the security issues that I've had in my groups. And it does add this additional step. And I feel like a lot of people are have enough on their plates with a pandemic and moving to Zoom that I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible for people. And okay, let me make sure I get out of Facebook. So I'm sharing my screen right now. Zoom. All right, so with most of our support groups, you are going to want to have that video option available to you and your participants as well. You're going to want that audio option that people can use their phone or their computer audio. That's what gives you a nice accessible group. For a support group versus like a work meeting, I don't enable the join before host. I mean, our support groups kind of begin and end on time. And for the support groups I facilitate, we always start with sort of a statement about our values, what we're affirming in the space. So we don't really enable that the group kind of begins when it begins. Now, this is one that we should consider. So for this meeting, we did all mute participants on entry. I do recommend it because in this time of like collective responsibility and sharing the Zoom accounts, what we can really do for one another is to mute our mics for those of us with slower internet. But for some people that can be a bit confusing how to do that. So I think there can be value, especially the larger group, to have that turned on. But just be aware, there might be some folks that you have to help with the unmuting, and we'll get to that. Enable a waiting room. We're not using this. Here's a situation where you might want to. If you have a group where you definitely want people to have heard the values before the group starts and not enter after a certain time, you can enable a waiting room, and that means, you know, you're deciding who enters the meeting. Now that's an additional control that you as a facilitator are going to have to track. But what it means is, and honestly, I don't do this in my own groups, but some of the alternatives to suicide groups have been considering it. A waiting room would mean that you can close the container of your group and say, hey, if you haven't joined this group in the first half an hour, then you know you need to find another group tomorrow or later in the day. This is a personal decision, and those are the factors that people consider. And don't worry about authenticated users for a support group. And definitely for a support group, you are not going to be recording your meeting. Cool. So it looks like our meeting is good to go. I think we've double checked it. HFA, Tuesdays, 5 p.m., 90-minute meeting. We're ready to save this bad boy. And now we have our access code. And this is the URL that most folks will utilize to join the meeting when you start it. But a lot of folks have been asking about that invitation. You can find that right here. Now, when I copy this, you saw how when I showed you the lists that I send out, the email I send out, I don't bother to tell. If it's a weekly meeting, probably no one really needs to know every single date for a support group. They'll come to the support group if they need the support. They know it's on Tuesday night. They don't really need to know the next 20 dates. You know, so in order to keep things manageable, I would copy this, but then kind of like delete some of it before I send it. But yeah, the essential stuff is right here. And if you're just local to one area, you might not, you know, sometimes I might just eliminate some of these numbers just to make it easier so people aren't like, oh my God, which one of those do I dial? Just keep it easier by, if that makes sense. So, and again, we talked about you can distribute that in many ways. So maybe it's in a Facebook group, an individual email, or a listserv. But the important thing is that we now have our meeting. And when it comes time, when it's time for HFA to meet, all you have to do, guys, is click the start button. And I'm not gonna do that right now because I will disappear. But it really is that easy. And then what's gonna happen is you're gonna be in a screen that looks like, hopefully a very large version of the Brady Bunch. And if people are old enough to get that reference, what you should see is a bunch of boxes with people's faces in it. And with Zoom, you have two options, speaker view or gallery view. As support group facilitators, folks, we are gonna wanna be in gallery view. We're gonna wanna be able to see all of our participants, who's there. So you can play with this right now by going to the top right of your screen, and you can toggle on and off between gallery and speaker. So if you're in gallery, it'll say speaker view. You can click that, and then you'll just see one person's box quite large. To change back to Brady Bunch gallery mode that we prefer as support group facilitators, you just click on that grid, and then you can see everyone's lovely face again. What we're gonna practice now is this is what our support group is gonna look like. So it's not quite sitting in a circle, but you're still gonna be able to see most everyone's face. Now, what we're gonna practice right now are a couple of really important skills to have when you're doing these groups. The first thing that we'll practice is the rename. So you noticed when I jumped in this meeting, if you were early, you saw I had to rename myself because the person that, you know, started this Zoom account is named Sarah Davidow and my name's Caroline. So that's not useful for people to see the wrong name in my box. Another thing is if you have people calling in by phone, guys, I'm trying to see, I don't think anyone is on the phone for this, which makes a lot of sense. But for your support groups, you will have that. And what you're gonna see is instead of this box with my face in it, you're gonna see just an icon of a phone, and down here, there's gonna be a phone number. So obviously that's not very private to have someone's phone number just kind of out there. I think it's fine if people wanna share their phone number in the chat box. That's fine in my groups anyway, but that should be a personal choice. So what I want people to practice is renaming themselves, because this is exactly the way that you will rename participants. So you can rename yourself. It's right by your mute button under the three dots. If you click the three dots, you will see where it says rename. And I think it'd be good, maybe if you've got both your names in there, to switch to just your first name. I see someone has switched to their Hebrew name, I think. Rivka, that is great. That's also my Hebrew name. Yeah, just as long as you're getting that practice is good, because you will, with your phone-in participants, guys, you're gonna have to do this for them. The other thing that you may, okay, some people are saying they don't have the three dots. Do you, okay, so where it should be in your, go to your individual screen where you see your own face, and in that screen, hover with your mouse and in the upper, the upper right corner of your individual box. Okay, so you must click on the three dots, guys. You have to click on the three dots, and then you'll see rename come up. And then you need to click on rename, and you know, I'm gonna put my full name in there now. So yeah, and there is another way to do this. Definitely when you're the host, you can look at the full participants list, And I'm trying to keep things kind of simple for folks. But if you can see like the full list of participants, you can also rename yourself that way by pressing the More button. Okay, so renaming is an important feature to learn. And again, if you forget any of this, remember, or if you're using like an iPad and you still are struggling to figure out this out, YouTube videos will show you. And then it's also important to see that mute button there, because I guarantee you, you're going to be facilitating your support group, and someone's going to have like a lot of background noise and might not be able to mute. So it's important to know where that feature is. Now, obviously, because I'm hosting this meeting, I have the power to mute and unmute you. I also have the power to remove you. You all can't mute me and you can't mute each other. But what I am going to do right now is I'm going to unmute Jeremy. Jeremy Ruling.
Hey.
Hi.
What's
Okay.
up?
So he did not unmute himself, but I unmuted him, and now I have the power as the host to say, hello, Jeremy, it's great to see you. I hope you're well, and I'm muting you now.
Okay.
And he says, okay. Cool. Another thing that you're not going to, yeah, it looks like someone else has figured out their mute button. That's great. Another thing that you are going to have as the host, and you're going to find this right when you're hosting, you're going to see this right where it says rename. You are also going to have a feature called remove. By pressing remove. And if you do this, there'll also be sort of that are you sure button that's like, are you sure, do you want to remove? And you'll click yes. If you remove someone, they will not be able to rejoin the meeting. So I'm already sharing my screen, so it's hard. You can't see where it says, it gives kind of the privacy of the host to remove people without it being obvious. So there's no way for me to show like my screen that's like, oh, I'm about to remove somebody. So that's something that you'll need to play around with when you're up and hosting. And yes, good question. Only the host can remove people from the group. Only the host. And what I'll say is, I've only had to do that a couple times in the course. I've been facilitating online hearing voices groups for years and years, and have rarely had to do that. Yes, if you remove someone from the group, they can rejoin the group next time, but not during that, that particular meeting. So the meeting would need to be ended and restarted, which you would do probably next week. And then they could rejoin. So if we've never had to ban anyone from the group, but if that did happen, we would have to change the access code or just keep removing them. And what I'll say, in my organization, we don't have a policy of ever doing a permanent ban. We would just institute kind of a break, and we would send a letter explaining exactly why. I've never had to do that though. In the hundreds and hundreds of online groups I've facilitated, I have had to do that in in-person groups, unfortunately, but we are not going to go there. All right, so I hope it's okay. I have not, my pacing has not been quite, I've only done this webinar once. looks like my Facebook messages are still coming in there. So pacing wise, there's still a few more things I'd like to share before we get to questions. But for sure, if something comes up, number one, you can always email me, or you can just throw it up there in the chat box right now, and we'll try to get to it. But what I want to talk about are just a couple of the considerations. So, you know, we've already talked about how internet bandwidth, we're already streaming so much video. So muting our microphones just makes things a whole lot easier. And with Zoom, it's like nearly impossible to hear multiple folks speaking at once. So, you know, encouraging people to unmute themselves. Yes, you can get a copy. Someone's asking for a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm recording this webinar, and if you email me, I didn't have time to throw this up on a Google Doc link before I began. Sorry, I just privately messaged that to someone. I'm putting my email in the chat box. Cool. So what we forgot to go over too is, you know, for some, you know, groups, I don't do this in my groups, but there are some groups where you raise your hand in order to speak. That's fine if you want to make that your group agreement. And you can right now, if you would like, practice raising your own hands by, again, clicking that ... that allowed you to rename yourself. Great. So people, I see people that are practicing raising their hands. So only you as the host will see this. And if you're clocking it, it's a way to know whether someone else wants to talk and is feeling just a little unsure of the platform and doesn't know how to break in. So you as the facilitator can support them with that. The raise hand option is under the ... where you renamed yourself. And honestly, as the host, I don't have it, but yes, you're also right. Sorry, they're kind of like, there's a lot of questions pouring in the chat box. If someone does not have video, well, if someone's like on a phone only, they don't have the hand raise option. So we're going to talk about that. I promise that's on a slide. So it is recommended to use gallery view if you're facilitating a support group, for the obvious reason, like, you know, we don't facilitate support groups where someone else is like in another room that we can't, you know, see. So it's easier to have that space. Now, I don't think we're going to have time for this webinar to demonstrate the breakout group feature of Zoom. And I'll be honest, like even, you know, even some of our large national groups, they have not really gotten to that size yet. But if your groups do get large and you have a co-facilitator, you can have your Zoom meeting break in half. And I think it's beyond the scope of this webinar to demonstrate that and talk about that, but there's some really great YouTube tutorials out there that will show you how. Whoa, okay. Hi, Vince. Oh my God, wow. Okay, so, and I have said there are other platforms available, and I've shared, you know, why we utilize this one. Okay. So what we're going to move to now is group dynamic considerations. So we've already talked about how your phone-in participants in particular, they're not going to have like any of the visual cues of how many people are in the space that they would have in person. They're also going to lack the hand raise and the chat box features. One of the strategies that I use is a common facilitation technique with in-person groups, especially ones where no one is forced to share, is to just do regular time checks, reminding people like how much time is left and how many people are in the space. That gives your participants more of that group, I'm a roller derby player, we would call it like pack awareness, like who's around me that might, also need to move into this space and share a little bit so that I can move out. Someone says, yay, roller derby. Yes, I am number 18, Mazel Tov cocktail. As facilitators, we can kind of, that's my roller derby name, by the way. People know about roller derby. We can sort of like guide, like add those cues back in just by using our words. And what I'll say is even in the groups where, I don't facilitate clinical groups, no one is forced to be there, no one is forced to share in any way. Sometimes when you make the move to this platform, someone might be struggling with the tech. So there are times where I might unmute someone in a very low pressure way, say, hey, no pressure to share, but I just wanted to see if you wanted to say hello. It's totally okay if not, because it might just be discomfort with the platform, and with an invitation and a little bit of like tech support, this person might have an experience that they do want to share. Again, guys, because people have that less group awareness, there can be some monologuing that can happen, especially if someone's on the phone and like they can't really see other folks there. So there are times when it's valuable as a facilitator to do that kind of like extremely respectful and validating interruption. I'm sure we've all done it, where someone like takes a breath and you just make sure to validate. Thank you so much for sharing about that experience. Your vulnerability really inspires me. When I'm doing this, I usually like to be kind of specific to what the person has shared. I think it's respectful to show that I have been listening to what they've said. So thank you for being willing to share about that experience with your mother. I'm wondering if anyone resonated with what you shared that wants to speak to that, or if other folks in the group have something else on their minds. I know we're probably all group facilitators here. We've done this. Just having your awareness that with the online, it could happen more because of sort of this shift in we're not in the same room, like, and some of us can't see each other. And if you're facilitating peer support groups, I will be transparent. There can be this phenomenon where it's like the host of the meeting gets framed as the expert. So it's important for me to name, hey, like, yes, I'm hosting this meeting through Zoom, but I just want to say I'm not the world's expert on what to do if you're hearing distressing voices. Like, I know what I do, and I'm going to share that, but I also use this group for support. I'm not here to just tell people what to do. This is a place for group wisdom, and we can all share our wisdom whether we're a host or not. I know everyone's support groups have different formats. But with Hearing Voices Network and Alternatives to Suicide and, you know, the Western Mass RLC, they are groups where it is more about the collective wisdom of the group. And so just having some awareness that that can shift, and you might need to call back to that more over the online. And I just wanted to share about the chat box. You know, chat box can be really useful. It can be a way for people to share resources. It can also be like really overwhelming too. You know, like as a facilitator, to be clocking the chat box and listening deeply to what's being shared in the group. This is one of the reasons why it's great to have a co-facilitator for a group. And there's often times where I've said, you know, in the group, like people can private message you. So I would never say out loud what someone's private messaged me for obvious reasons. But I could say, you know, hey, Joe, I noticed you have a lot to share in the chat box. Do you want space to share about it in the group? And you can be transparent, you know, in a peer support group and say, hey, it's hard for me to both read a lot of words and listen deeply to what other people are sharing. Now, so people are asking how to private message. If you go into your chat box where it says to, it's a lot like an email. You can look, I forget whether I've enabled everyone to communicate with each other. But that too will show you who you're communicating with. Okay, so Jeremy's saying you can either choose right now to communicate to me personally or communicate to everyone. And I have done this for our peer support groups. It is a personal choice. You can change the chat settings. That's going to be beyond the scope of this webinar because it's 422. That will be in the settings part of your Zoom screen. And if you have a Zoom account, there are many Zoom tutorials. You can change the settings so that everyone in the group can private message each other. I'll just be fully transparent. We have had some tricky things come up around that, where someone started private messaging something to someone that they did not want to read, and it was unwanted. So typically, you know, what I do is just in our groups, totally allow folks to utilize that chat box, but it's for stuff that you're kind of like publicly sharing with the group. And I don't feel like too bad about doing that. I mean, if we're in like, you know, a support group setting, like unless you've got like telepathy, you're not able to like communicate privately to other people in the group like necessarily. And so, yeah, it's totally, I'm not gonna make like, again, as I said before, I've been facilitating HVN support groups online over Zoom for 3 years. And my recommendations are just what's worked for me, but it doesn't mean that you have to do things this way. And so that's kind of all I wanted to cover. I can leave my contact up there. But, you know, really my intention with this time is to just build a little bit more confidence in folks, get to know kind of what to expect. There's always different things that come up. You know, if you're dealing with something, feel free to reach out. We've probably dealt with it ourselves. And I guess what I want to say is that I'm just really, really grateful to everyone that is willing to make this step. I am someone that has friends that have been tested positive for the virus. And so I am so moved by the fact that, you guys are already doing support groups, and it really moves me that you're willing to make this step to offer support and also stop the spread of COVID-19. So you're really doing two huge favors to your communities at one time. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So yeah, and it looks like there's a lot of love and support of everyone in that chat box. And feel free, I'm gonna stick around here because I did want to dedicate a full 90 minutes. So if there are questions that we could answer kind of in the short term, I'm happy if folks have any of those. Any questions that people want to put in the chat box? Cool. Well, it looks like a lot of folks are feeling a lot more confident, and that is great. And I will just, my parting words that I will say is, I said this to some of my colleagues yesterday, no one comes out of the womb knowing how to Zoom. We're all learning this. We're figuring it out together. It's okay if there's some bumps along the way. I'm gonna put my contact back in the chat box so that people can see it. And my plan for this recording is when we're done to just get it up on YouTube, on the Western Mass RLC YouTube. So, sorry, I'm putting my email. I'm actually just gonna share the screen again with my contact info. Okay, this is me. And what you'll see there is also my organizational affiliation. You can sign up for the newsletter from the Western Mass RLC, and that's a good way to get the recording. I think we'll probably blast it out to everyone. But again, I'm gonna throw it up there on YouTube if I can figure that out right after we're done. And if you want to email me, I can give you the link to it. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. I am really glad that we could spend this time learning and sharing wisdom together. And I'm wishing you the best of luck with all the supports that you're bringing online. And yeah, if you want to learn more about either the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community or the Hearing Voices Network, I would really encourage that. There is the website for the Hearing Voices, USA.org. Thanks, everyone. Wishing everyone health and some moments of peace as we weather this storm. And now I'm gonna do what you will all be doing one day by placing your arrow at the bottom right of your screen, where you now say leave, see it say leave meeting. When you are hosting, you will be ending the meeting. It will ask you if you are sure, and then you will click that button to end your meeting for that night. And I'm sure that they will all be amazing meetings full of connection and growth and healing. So I'm going to end our meeting right now, and good luck, everybody.